What's up everybody, Jameson Redding here with the Road Trip Angler. In this video, I want to talk to you about choosing the right paddle for kayak fishing. Now, kayak fishing is a bit different than most paddle sports because most paddle sports, that is the entire sport. You're going to paddle. But with kayak fishing, sometimes you paddle, sometimes you have a motor on the back, sometimes you have a pedal drive. But in every situation, you should always have your paddle with you because mechanical things fail and because sometimes you get too shallow to even be able to use those pedal drive systems and those motors. And a lot of times you just want to keep it simple and just use a paddle. I've been doing this for over 15 years now, and I can say that every time I hit the water, there is some situation, some scenario where I'm going to be using that paddle no matter how I'm primarily propelling the boat. So it's really important to think about a few things, and we're going to go through those when it comes to choosing the right paddle. When you start looking at paddles, it can be a bit overwhelming because there are a lot of brands and there are a lot of paddles. Now, I've been working with bending branches for a long time, so the paddles that I have here are both aqua bound and bending branches because that's what I have. But no matter which brand you go with, these things that I'm going to go over are going to apply. Now, I will say that not every brand is created equal, and there are definitely high quality paddle manufacturers out there, and there are also manufacturers that, let's be honest, they're just not making a great product. And I'm not going to go through and say what brands I think are the best. I think you can pretty much tell that if you do a little bit of research. I've used bending branches for years. I'm very, very happy with them. And they understand that kayak anglers use their paddles as a bit more of a tool than just a paddle. We're pushing off of rocks, we're pushing off of wood. I'm standing up and fishing. I'm using it to measure my catch sometimes because you do have that tape measure. I'm actually getting hooks dislodged from things with it. I've even cleared a path to be able to drag my kayak down to the water by knocking grass down with that paddle blade. So I'm definitely a lot harder on my paddle than the average paddler would be. And I think most kayak fishermen can relate to that. This is a tool that we need even if we have a motor or a pedal drive, because sometimes we've got to make those small adjustments, or we've got to get in an area that's too shallow, or our mechanical thing fails. And having a good paddle that is the right length, the right type of material, and is going to hold up to everything that we throw at it is super key and super important. I think the first thing you want to ask yourself before you even start really looking at the length of paddle and some of those things is, where are you primarily going to be fishing and how are you primarily going to be targeting those fish? Meaning, are you going to be at the coast and primarily standing up to sight fish, and you're going to be fishing around oysters, and you're going to be fishing around sandy bottoms and coastal type fishery or coastal region scenario? Or are you going to be floating a river that is very rocky and very shallow? Or are you going to be primarily fishing open water in lakes where you don't have a lot of obstacles to run into, like rocks, trees, or oysters? These things all play a factor because it's going to help you decide where to start. Paddles come in a lot of different materials, and knowing those materials and where they shine is really important, I think, when you're determining which paddle you need based on what type of water you're primarily fishing. For example, I have this aquabound paddle here. This is going to be one of the more inexpensive paddles that we look at today. Doesn't mean it's a bad paddle in any way, shape, or form, but the materials are different. And as you get lighter and you go up to different materials, that price point is also going to go up. But where this would come in really nicely is if you are beating the crap out of your paddle, a plastic blade is going to take that beating a lot better than, say, a carbon fiber blade. You know, you're not going to want to hit rocks as hard with that carbon fiber because you could chip it, you could break it. Not likely going to happen most of the time. I'm pretty rough on my carbon paddles, but just keep in mind it may start to scratch and not look as pretty as it does when you first get it. So a plastic blade can be nice if you're going to be fishing around a lot of obstacles where you're hitting the rocks and you're pushing off of stuff quite frequently and you're worried about damaging that blade. Now, this paddle also has an aluminum shaft. Now, as we get into these different materials, I also want to share that when you're talking about paddle efficiency, it is also important to think about those materials as well as when we're talking about durability. While this paddle might be great for floating down a river where you're not really needing to paddle a whole lot, you're just kind of steering the boat, it is a heavier paddle due to the fact that it has an aluminum shaft and a plastic blade. And that aluminum is going to have a little more flex in it, as is that plastic blade. So you're going to lose some efficiency while you're paddling. As I'm moving this through the water, a little bit of flex is gonna happen both in the blade and in the paddle shaft itself, and that is gonna transfer less energy from me to the water, meaning that this is a less efficient paddle. Plus, as I swing this back and forth, over time, I'm gonna notice that this is a heavier paddle than one of the others that we're gonna take a look at. However, that all being said, if you're someone that's pretty rough on your gear and you're constantly pushing it off of things, this plastic blade is gonna give, it's gonna flex, it's not gonna chip, and it's probably not gonna break as easy as some of the paddles that we're gonna look at that are lighter and a little bit more expensive. If you're someone that's beating the crap out of your paddle, maybe look at getting a plastic blade or a type of nylon, carbon nylon mix type blade where you're gonna have some durability. Now, I don't have that paddle here. Bending Branches, however, does make one called the Ace. What's cool about that paddle is you still get a carbon shaft, so you get that lightweight shaft and you get all that stiffness and efficiency from that carbon shaft, but you have a nylon blade, which is a little bit stiffer than this plastic blade material, and you're gonna transfer more energy, but also very, very durable for when you're pushing off of those rocks. So if you can step up from an aluminum shaft to a carbon shaft, maybe look for a paddle that has that carbon shaft and that nylon blade versus a plastic blade, a little stiffer, a little more efficiency. And it's still gonna hold up to all that beating and banging that happens when you're out there around really rocky scenarios or around oysters. Now, I have a unique paddle here. This one is a carbon shaft and a wooden blade. And you might think, well, that is gonna be very undurable, but canoe paddles have been made out of wood for a very long time. And this one actually has this rock guard material on the tip, which allows me to beat the crap out of it. Not saying that you should try to break it or should go out there and beat the crap out of it, but that's what we do as kayak anglers. The reason I really like this paddle, it does have a carbon shaft, it does have a wooden blade, so it is a little bit heavier than say a full carbon blade and full carbon shaft paddle. However, wood is naturally buoyant. So when you're paddling, as you move this up and down to take those strokes, because this blade floats, it naturally wants to come back to the surface. So as you're lifting that blade out of the water, you're getting the assistance of that blade floating, and then you're only having to dip the other one in. The other thing I really like about this blade, I do a lot of flats fishing, and it is super important to be quiet, especially the clearer the water is. Say if I'm down in the Keys or in Florida where I have really clear water, it is really important to be quiet. And this, I have found, is the quietest blade going in and out of the water. That also has a lot to do with your paddle technique, but this video is about choosing the right paddle, not about paddle technique. So keep in mind that if you do go with a wood blade, that it's gonna be a lot quieter than some of the others. And because it does float, that blade does wanna float up, it actually helps you with that swing weight. So carbon shaft, wood blade, this is a pretty durable kayak paddle with that rock guard on the tip. It's also a beautiful paddle. Mine has scratches all over it and it still holds up very well. And you get a lot of stiffness out of the blade. It doesn't flex like that plastic blade did. So you're gonna get a lot of efficiency from a wooden blade and a carbon shaft. As we move up to the full carbon shaft and a fiberglass blade, this is going to be a very efficient paddle. We also shed a little more weight because we have that glass blade and we have that carbon shaft. Now you have almost no flex at all here, so very efficient on the water and very lightweight as you swing that paddle back and forth. One of the issues historically that I've had, not necessarily had, but over time, let's say, 3-4 years of heavy use with a paddle where I am using it as that tool and I am pushing off those rocks, but I also like the fact that I have a very efficient paddle that's very lightweight and I go with a carbon or a fiberglass type shaft, is the layers. There is layers of material here of fiberglass that are laid out. And as I use this tip to push off of things, what can happen is I can damage that, allowing moisture to get in between those layers, and eventually that may split apart. One of the things that Branches has done recently too is, if you can see it, there's this stitching that goes all the way around. This is called their lamb lock technology. They brought that over from their aquabound paddles, which are more their recreational paddles, not necessarily kayak fishing paddles. This is awesome because this is gonna keep it together, keep those layers together. Even if I chip the ends of this paddle by pushing off of things that I probably shouldn't be pushing off of and using the paddle in a manner that could lead to damaging that tip, it's not gonna let those layers start to split apart and delaminate where my paddle becomes useless over time. I can now go to a fiberglass blade and still have the durability of, say, a nylon blade and not worry so much about it. You're gonna get scratches on it. That's just part of it. But this will keep it from delaminating and keep those layers together and not allow them to separate as you chip those ends. I'm telling you, I don't care how good of a paddler you are. If you're a kayak angler, you're gonna be pushing off of stuff with this paddle at some point. Lastly, as we move up to the top of the line, if you will, on any paddle, having a full carbon shaft and a full carbon blade, it is gonna be the lightest weight paddle that you've ever held in your hand. It's also gonna be the most efficient because there's literally no flex here in the blade. It's a very stiff, rigid blade, and you're able to transfer all of that energy from the rotation of your torso as you're paddling to the water and propel that kayak through the water very nicely. Again, when we're loading down our kayaks, every little ounce of weight that we can save means we can bring more gear. So I like using a carbon paddle because it is super lightweight, it is super efficient, and it's pretty quiet on the water. This one also has that landlock technology from branches, so I'm not as worried about that tip getting damaged. So to recap the material, depending on where you're fishing and how often you think that your paddle is going to come in contact with the river bottom or the bottom in general, rocks, wood, oyster beds, if you're pushing off of that kind of stuff a lot, you may want to consider something like the Angler Ace that has that nylon blade and not look at a carbon paddle if you don't want to see chips in the end. It's still going to hold up very well, but you're definitely going to notice that you get more scratches. You're gonna notice that it just is gonna take a beating a little bit more than, say, a nylon blade. Consider getting what you can afford. If you can move up into a carbon shaft, that efficiency is gonna transfer to the water and you're gonna be a lot less fatigued at the end of the day. Moving on from the type of material and what type of water you're fishing and how that fits in, I want to talk about the blade shape itself and how to choose the right length paddle. Now, when it comes to blade shapes, this is getting a little bit in the weeds or a little bit technical, and most of us that start out kayak fishing have no background in paddling. So we don't really know if we're a high angle paddler or a low angle paddler. Now, what am I talking about when I'm talking about high angle and low angle? So if in the kayak, when you're sitting and paddling, you tend to be here, your hands are not moving up and down a whole lot. You definitely want to be twisting your body. There's a whole video I could jump into on how to have the proper technique so that you're less fatigued. You're not using your arms are kind of staying the same, slightly bent maybe, but you're not bending them back and forth. You're actually twisting at your waist and twisting that torso. Good way to do that is to look at your paddle blade and follow it with your body as you turn. But that's a whole another video. When you do that though, if you're relaxed and your paddle is staying about like this as you paddle, then you're a little bit more of a low angle paddler. If you're making aggressive paddle strokes, you're really trying to move the boat quickly across the water, a lot of times your paddle blade and your paddle shaft is gonna be more vertical, and you're gonna be putting that blade in the water closer to the side of that kayak. That is a higher angle style of paddling. I use a bit of both. If I'm relaxed and I'm covering water and I'm not really in a hurry, I'm gonna be a little more low angle. When I'm trying to attain up river and I'm trying to make it back up a rapid or trying to make it up current, or maybe I'm paddling against the wind, I'm really digging hard. I'm gonna be dipping that paddle in closer to the kayak, which is gonna give me more efficiency and make me paddle quicker. It's a little bit more aggressive. So if you're a low angle paddler, most of the low angle paddle blades out there are gonna be a bit narrower than this. So longer blade from where it meets the shaft to the tip, and it's gonna tend to be a bit skinnier because it's a more relaxed style of paddling. High angle blade shapes, typically found in whitewater, or for those that are sea kayakers that are really digging and trying to cover a lot of space, are gonna be shorter and fatter blades. All the kayak paddles that I have here today are kind of a hybrid between those two. So it's a little bit longer and not quite as fat as a high angle blade shape that you would find in regular kayak paddles. and it's not quite as skinny or as narrow as a low angle blade shape. Low angle is your here, high angle, to recap, is here, and I like this hybrid style blade because I can get away really with doing both. If I want to get powerful, I can dig with this blade. I've got plenty of surface area to move that water. But if I want to relax and I'm just kind of covering, you know, the water, not in a very big hurry, then I still have the best of both worlds really when it comes to that. So think about that though when you're choosing a blade shape. If you think you're going to be more close to the paddle, close to the boat, and you're going to be more of this higher angle when you're paddling, or next time you go out paddling, if you already have a paddle but you're thinking about upgrading, think about how you're paddling, what's comfortable to you, and then you can match that to it. Now, everything I'm talking about, if this is your first purchase of a kayak fishing paddle, you really should go out and test out a couple of different paddles. Most shops have some sort of demo day. They may have some loaner paddles that you can demo or borrow a buddy's or whatever, and find one that fits and is comfortable to you. That is the most important thing. Take that into consideration. Blade shape is important based on where you're at. This is in the middle, and all the paddles that I have here today are in the middle between a low angle shape and a high angle shape, which I think fits most kayak anglers very, very well. Now, this is also going to affect how long your paddle shaft needs to be. Now, a lot of people have the misconception that it's based on your height or it's based on your wingspan, your arms. It's really not when it comes to kayak fishing. The reason being is that our kayaks tend to be a lot wider than a recreational kayak or than a touring kayak or than a whitewater kayak. They're wide platforms. How many times have you heard, why don't you just get a boat? I mean, that's essentially what they are becoming. They're still kayaks. We still move them with kayak paddles. However, they're a lot wider. Also, the seating positions on most of these boats are quite a bit higher than they would be in a standard recreational boat. So you have to take those things into consideration. How wide is your kayak? How high is your seat position? And then you can dial down to what length you need. The last thing you want to do is be reaching way over here to get to the water, leaning that head out over the boat, making it unstable. You want to be able to comfortably reach the water with your paddle stroke, keeping your body twisting again, but not having to reach out here or reach out there. Now, there are certain strokes that will require you to reach if you're doing a big bow stroke where you're putting the blade in at the bow and doing a sweeping stroke to turn the boat. Same if you're going from the stern to the bow. There's also different strokes like the sculling draw or a draw stroke where you're reaching out and you're pulling the water back to the kayak so that you can move that sideways. So there are times that you're gonna be reaching out, but what I'm talking about is when you're simply just paddling, you want to be in a situation where you're not having to reach back and forth, because that's a lot more work than you need to be doing. So how do you know what size to get? Well, it really is up to you and your boat, but a good rule of thumb is most kayak anglers are going to start out at around a 235 to 240 and then go up to, I would say, a 250, 255. You would have to have a really, really wide kayak and be, you know, in a scenario that I don't think really exists to go out to a 260. Even though most manufacturers now make a 260, I think that is overkill. And even 255 most times is overkill. One of the things to consider is that there are some options to have adjustable length shafts. So you can actually get a kayak paddle that will shrink down. So if you're in a kayak that has a low and high seating position, you can adjust it as you move that seat up and down. Or if you have a few different kayaks, you can play around with that length. Now, one of the things that does is it adds a bit of weight because there's more shaft material in there. This particular one here is a 240 to 255, which is my happy spot on about any kayak that I have. I'm gonna be able to adjust this on the fly, get it where I want it, and I've got 15 centimeters of travel, so I can go 5, 10, anywhere in between, all the way out to 15, and lock that back down, and I'm gonna be able to find that adjustment. But you add all this length right here, which makes it heavier. Is it noticeably heavier throughout the day? Yeah, you can tell a difference. So if you have only one kayak, or you're pretty much fishing out of a boat that has a fixed seated position and a fixed width, and you want to use your paddle quite a bit, maybe just try to find the right size for you. This paddle here has an adjustable ferrule, but not lengthwise. So I can adjust the angle of the blade shape, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but I can't really adjust the length of it. And this is a 250, which in my XTR, I find to be the right length for me because I can reach the water comfortably and I can make those strokes. What you don't want is when you reach the water, you don't want a lot of this shaft to be going into the water because you're reducing your efficiency. You're making it a lot harder on yourself to get that blade in and out of the water, and you're doing more work than you need to do. You just want the blade itself in the water, maybe even a little bit of it sticking out of the water. You don't want your shaft to be going into the water, and you don't want to be reaching. So finding that sweet spot where you're getting to the water, but you're not way too deep or you're not way too shallow is where you want to be. Again, I would start at around a 240 or so, and I would go up to say 250, 255 until you find what feels comfortable to you. And play around with your different paddling strokes. Try high angle paddle strokes, try some more relaxed paddle strokes, and that will also determine what length paddle you need. It is really handy to be able to adjust the paddle, so if you're willing to accept that you're gonna have a little bit more weight and you have a few different kayaks that you want to be able to take that paddle and move it from boat to boat, maybe consider getting one that has that adjustable length in the shaft. Lastly, I want to talk about a few other features to consider when looking at kayak paddles. Now, this again comes from learning this over time and becoming more of a paddler as I have gotten into kayak fishing more. I've realized that boat position is the biggest challenge when it comes to kayak fishing, and really any type of fishing. If you're fishing from a watercraft, even a big boat, being able to position your boat efficiently, quickly, and then hold that position so that you can make more casts into that strike zone, into that area where those fish are holding, you're simply going to catch more fish. So being a more efficient paddler and being capable of doing some different strokes to control your boat quickly and easily, it's going to make you a better kayak fisherman. That is why it is important to have a good paddle that is the right length and is the right material for you to have the best possibility of success when you're out there using that paddle. Some of the features that I wanted to talk about though that are outside of the material, the length, the blade shape, is the ferrule itself. So I have a couple of different versions here. I mentioned one of them also is adjustable in length on the shaft, but this is a pretty standard, simple paddle here. You've got 3 positions. So you've got it to where your blades are both going to be straight in line with one another. You can then also push the button. That's how you take the paddle apart as well. But you can adjust it, and now you can see that I've got an angle that's different on the blade on the front here and the one on the back. Now, why would you do that? Sometimes it's just for comfort. And people, the way that their wrists are, the way they hold the paddle, they like to have those paddle blades canted slightly offset from each other, and it just feels more natural when they're entering and exiting the water on each side. I personally do like mine turned slightly like that, and it just feels better on my wrist, and I feel like it's more efficient. There is also a factor of wind, and I've heard people say that it doesn't matter, it doesn't affect it. However, I have also been out on a very windy day when I could feel when that wind was hitting me, and if you're like me, it always seems to be that the wind is blowing directly into my face and keeping me from going where I want to go. So I've been out there plenty of times when I could feel the wind pushing that blade that's up in the air. So by slightly turning it, you're gonna be able to slice through that wind. Now, is it a rare occasion that the wind is blowing the exact direction that's causing that to happen? For me, it feels like it's every single time I'm on the water. I'm paddling, I'm either going against the current, against the tide, or I'm going against the wind. Better planning on my part would probably keep me from having to do that, but I can tell you that I notice when the wind is pushing against this blade. So having a paddle that you can adjust that on the fly, whether it's the fixed adjustment that I just showed you with the push button, you've got 3 different angles to play with there, or it's one like this that can be adjusted in very small amounts. So let's see if you can see this. This has little teeth here, and I can actually adjust that one little click at a time all the way around. It's gonna pop in. So this is a very cool design because I can really dial it in at different degrees. So it has 2 buttons, one on each side of the shaft, those orange buttons there. And you can really dial this in small increments. It looks like there's 30 degrees, 0, you can do up to 60 degrees. So you can really dial it in to fit what's comfortable for you. So that is something to consider when it comes to features, is do you want more adjustments here? And typically your higher end paddles are gonna have more adjustments than your lower end paddles that just have a push button and basically 3 holes for you to be able to try those different angles. The shafts that I have that allow you to adjust them in length also give you that infinite adjustability in your ferrule angle as well. So keep that in mind as you're looking at different paddles and you're looking at the features of those paddles. Typically, as you go up to a higher price point paddle, you're gonna get a few more features like that are a little bit, you know, nice to have if you're playing around with that to get your comfort dialed in, but also if you're dealing with that wind. One of the other things that I didn't mention about that adjustable length shaft that I find nice is I'm someone who likes to stand and sit to paddle. Most of the time, if I'm standing up to fish, I've got my hand on top of the blade and I'm paddling from a standing position. And occasionally I'm on a boat where I'm either standing in the seat or I have a platform to get me higher off the water. And that's when it's nice. I can actually adjust that paddle length from a seated position where I'm paddling to a standing position where I'm using it to maneuver the boat around while I'm sight fishing. Hopefully this helps you choose the right paddle for yourself. Keep in mind that even if you have a motor or a pedal drive system, it's still good to have a great paddle as a backup, but also as a means of moving the boat around when, let's say, your pedal drive system is too deep for you to be able to use or your motor is too deep. And learning some paddle technique is super important as well. And you can do that through a lot of videos that are out there, but just getting out on the water and practicing and learning how to use that paddle, it's gonna allow you to maneuver that boat better and it's gonna allow you to catch more fish. To quickly recap, things to consider when choosing the right kayak fishing paddle for yourself. Number 1, what types of water are you fishing? Are you gonna be beating the paddle up on the bottom a lot because you fish shallow rocky rivers or around oyster beds? Or are you primarily in open water like, say, a lake? If you're beating it up a lot, maybe consider a nylon or a plastic blade, but keep in mind it's not gonna be as efficient to paddle those blade materials as, say, a carbon or fiberglass blade. However, they're gonna take a beating and it doesn't hurt as bad to put a gouge in a plastic blade as it does to put one in a carbon blade. If you're someone in open water, you may want to go ahead and consider moving up to a carbon or fiberglass blade because you're going to get more efficiency, allowing you to cover the water quicker and be less fatigued at the end of the day. Look for things like the lamb lock technology that are going to keep your blade very durable, because we use our blades and our kayak paddles as tools more than we do just paddles. Carbon fiber shaft, fiberglass shaft, aluminum shaft. As you go from aluminum to carbon, that is going to get more efficient and it's going to get lighter, but the price is always going to increase as you shed weight and move up into that higher material or better quality materials. Other thing to consider is your blade shape. Are you more of a high angle or a low angle paddler? Keep that in mind. And then your shaft length or your kayak paddle length. Keep that in mind too, because it really boils down to how high off the water are you with your seat and how wide is your kayak. Make sure you're not getting it too deep in the water, but you're still able to get to the water without having to reach out from one side to the other. Hopefully that helps you choose the right kayak fishing paddle for you. Please let me know in the comments if you have any questions. And as always, thanks for watching.